The resurrection of Christ is completely rational. In this video, we provide reasoning and evidence to establish the thesis mentioned above. 1. Thesis: the resurrection of Christ is completely rational.
A. There is historical evidence that points to the truth of the resurrection of Christ. See our video titled, Historical Evidence for the Resurrection of Jesus. B. The resurrection is logically possible in both atheism and in theism. See our video titled, Is the resurrection of Jesus logical? C. So, there is no rational reason to reject the resurrection of Christ.
D. Atheists believe in things that are much less probable than the resurrection of Christ,
e.g., abiogenesis and naturalistic mega-evolution, both of which are logically and empirically impossible, as we have demonstrated in many videos. E. So, atheists have no rational grounds to reject the resurrection of Christ.
Conclusion: the resurrection of Christ is completely rational. 2. Miracles: the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
A. The primary reason to reject the resurrection is because of the atheist, religious belief that miracles are impossible. B. However, if God exists, miracles are possible. And, the resurrection is possible. C. It is a reasonable inference that God exists. Therefore, miracles are possible.
D. The historical evidence, see below, supports the resurrection.
E. The disciples paid with their lives for their repeated testimony that Jesus did rise from the dead. They had no motive to lie. No fame, fortune, women, or worldly success. Just beatings, imprisonment, and ultimate death. They had been skeptical, but were converted by the evidence for Jesus' resurrection. F. The disciples had empirical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. They saw him, heard him, touched him, ate meals with him, after he came back from the dead, for a period of 40 days. Based on this empirical evidence, they testified that Jesus had come back from the dead, and they were willing to give their lives for this fact. G. These facts rule out alternative hypotheses, that the disciples were lying or that they were mistaken. Not hallucination. Many different followers saw Jesus, post-resurrection, heard him, touched him, spoke with him, ate meals with him, on many different occasions over 40 days. This rules out the hypothesis that Jesus was an individual hallucination. Not mistaken. All of the disciples, and many other followers, saw Jesus, post-resurrection, heard him, touched him, spoke with him, ate meals with him. This rules out the hypothesis that they were mistaken about Jesus being alive, after his crucifixion and resurrection. Not lying. Men will lie to avoid hardship, to avoid punishment, to avoid torture, to avoid death. Men will lie to gain fame, fortune, women. The disciples had none of these motives. Their testimony, that Jesus came back from the dead, brought them hardship, punishment, torture, and death. And their testimony did not bring them fame, or fortune, or women. They lost their possessions, their families, and their lives, for their testimony. So, the lives of the disciples stands as testimony to the truth of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And, so does their verbal and written testimony, attested to by independent writers Matthew, Mark, Peter, Luke, John, Paul. H.
Therefore, it is reasonable and rational to infer that the resurrection of Jesus Christ did indeed occur.
Conclusion: it is reasonable and rational to infer that the resurrection of Jesus Christ did indeed occur.
3. Historical evidence: the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
A. Jesus' tomb was found empty by a group of his women followers on the first day of the week following his crucifixion. B. Various individuals and groups on different occasions and under varying circumstances experienced appearances of Jesus alive. C. The first disciples came sincerely to believe in Jesus' resurrection despite every predisposition to the contrary. Dr. William Lane Craig.
Conclusion: the resurrection of Christ is a reasonable and rational inference from the historical evidence. 4. Historical minimal facts: the resurrection. These are facts that are considered historical by a nearly unanimous consensus of modern scholars. A. Jesus died by crucifixion. B. After Jesus' death, many of his followers had separate experiences that led them to believe and proclaim that Jesus had come back from the dead. C. Shortly after Jesus' death, Paul converted after experiencing what he understood to be a post-resurrection appearance of Jesus. Dr. Gary Habermas, Steve Duvall. Conclusion: the resurrection of Christ is a reasonable and rational inference from the historical evidence. 5. Abiogenesis versus resurrection. A resurrection from the dead is many times more likely than abiogenesis, generating life from non-life by natural processes. After all, a dead body has all of the necessary parts for life present already.
It already has many proteins produced and folded correctly. It already has a genetic code built within DNA.
It has phospholipid membranes already in place.
It has cellular machinery. By far the biggest problem for abiogenesis is producing all these things by chance. Just getting any functional protein without guidance would take billions of years of chance chemical reactions. A dead cell already has many proteins in place as well as all the other chemicals and parts needed for life. Lindsay Harold.
Inference. So, the resurrection is much more rational, reasonable, and logical than abiogenesis.
Conclusion. The resurrection of Christ is completely reasonable and rational. Thanks to Dr. William Lane Craig, Dr. Gary Habermas, Lindsay Harold, Steve Duvall for excerpts above. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.